Beyond the clock. The air in the basement of Blackwood University's abandoned Ashford Hall tasted of forgotten things, damp concrete, decaying paper, and the metallic tang of rust. It was a tomb for obsolete knowledge, a place where forgotten physics experiments and dusty archives were left to die. For Alex, it was a cathedral of history. For Michael, it was a dare. "You sure about this, man?" Alex whispered, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous swath through the thick darkness. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny, frantic ghosts. "Campus security patrols this wing. If we get caught." "We won't get caught," Michael shot back, his voice echoing with unearned confidence. He was already prying open the lid of a wooden crate with a crowbar. "They haven't set foot in this hole since the 70s. Think of the stuff we could find. Old yearbooks, weird lab equipment, bragging rights." Alex was the strategist, the thinker. He saw consequences, calculated risks, and usually opted for the path of least resistance. Michael was the spark, the engine of chaos. He saw possibilities, chased thrills, and believed that caution was just another word for boring. They were a perfectly balanced, perpetually unstable duo, and had been since they'd met in freshman orientation. The crate lid groaned open with a splintering crack. Michael coughed, waving away a plume of ancient dust. Inside was nothing but stacks of yellowed scientific journals. "Bust," he declared, moving deeper into the cavernous basement. Alex followed, his light skimming over hulking shapes draped in white cloths. They looked like sleeping giants. He pulled back one of the sheets, revealing a chaotic assembly of vacuum tubes and copper wiring. "Looks like an old particle accelerator. Or a really complicated coffee machine." It was Michael who found it. "Alex, you're gonna want to see this." His voice was different. The usual bravado was gone, replaced by a note of genuine awe. Alex navigated through the labyrinth of forgotten science and found Michael standing before the largest and most peculiar object in the room. It was a machine, but unlike any they had ever seen. It stood over 10 feet tall, constructed in a perfect circle like the face of a colossal grandfather clock. But instead of numbers, its brass dial was covered in intricate, swirling symbols that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of their vision. A cascade of immense copper gears, some as large as truck tires and others as delicate as watch components, formed its inner workings. They were all interconnected in a three-dimensional tapestry of impossible complexity. At its heart was a cylindrical cabin, just large enough for two people, encased in thick, curved glass that seemed to drink the light from Alex's flashlight. A small, tarnished brass plaque was bolted to its base. Alex knelt, wiping away decades of grime. The engraved letters were stark and clear. Chronos Mk.I, prototype. Do not activate. Whoa, Michael breathed, his eyes wide. Chronos. Like the Greek god of time. This is insane, Alex said, tracing the letters with his finger. This must have been some secret project the university was working on. Cold War stuff, maybe. He stood up, a shiver running down his spine that had nothing to do with the basement's chill. We should go. This feels wrong. But Michael was already circling the machine, his hand tracing the cool curve of the glass cabin. His eyes found what Alex had missed, a single, large red button on a small control pedestal next to the cabin door. It was the only splash of color on the entire muted, metallic structure. It looked like a drop of blood on a brass giant. "Don't even think about it, Mike," Alex warned, his voice tight. "Think about what?" Michael asked, his grin a flash of white in the gloom. "Think about the one rule of every story ever told. If you find a big red button with a "Do Not Push" sign, you're contractually obligated to push it. This isn't a story, it's a trespassing charge waiting to happen. We don't know what this thing does. It could irradiate the entire campus. It could be a bomb. Or," Michael said, his hand hovering over the button, "it could be the coolest thing that's ever happened to anyone, ever." Before Alex could protest further, Michael slammed his palm down. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The silence in the basement felt louder than ever. Michael looked at Alex and shrugged, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Well, that was anticlimactic. And then, a low hum started. It began deep within the machine, a resonant vibration they felt in the soles of their shoes. One by one, the copper gears began to turn. Slowly at first, with the groaning protest of long-dormant metal, then faster, and faster still. The symbols on the outer dial began to glow with a soft, blue light. The hum escalated into a deafening roar, the sound of 1,000 clocks all ticking at once, converging into a single, powerful tone that made their teeth ache. A brilliant white light erupted from the glass cabin. Arcs of static electricity snapped between the gears, filling the air with the sharp scent of ozone. "We need to get out of here," Alex yelled over the noise, grabbing Michael's arm. But it was too late. An unseen force yanked them off their feet, pulling them inexorably toward the glowing cabin. The basement dissolved around them, the concrete walls and dusty shelves smearing into a vortex of swirling color and light. They felt a crushing pressure, a sense of being pulled apart and reassembled at the atomic level. They shouted, but the sound was swallowed by the temporal storm. The chaos ended as abruptly as it began. They were thrown onto rough, muddy ground. The roaring in their ears was replaced by a cacophony of new sounds, the clang of a hammer on an anvil, the braying of a donkey, the shouts of vendors, and the murmur of a dense crowd speaking a guttural, unfamiliar version of English. The smell hit them like a physical blow. A thick, ripe stew of wood smoke, roasting meat, unwashed bodies, and animal waste. Alex pushed himself up, his head spinning. They were in the middle of a bustling town square. The buildings were half-timbered, with thatched roofs and crooked walls. People milled around them in rough-spun tunics, leather jerkins, and simple dresses. A night, His armor dull and dented from use, pushed his way through the crowd, his sword slapping against his hip. "Michael," Alex croaked, his throat raw. "Where are we?" Michael was staring, his mouth agape, at a massive stone castle that loomed over the town. "I don't know," he said, his voice a whisper of pure shock. "But I don't think we're on campus anymore." The initial shock gave way to a surge of adrenaline-fueled excitement. It was a real-life history book. They spent an hour just wandering, their modern jeans and hoodies drawing suspicious stares from the locals. They saw merchants selling everything from live chickens to crudely made iron tools. They saw guards with halberds and children chasing stray dogs through the muddy streets. "This is incredible." Michael laughed, pointing at a wanted poster depicting a crudely drawn man with a massive beard. "We actually did it. We time-traveled." The euphoria lasted until Alex asked the inevitable, terrifying question. "Where's the machine?" They spun around, scanning the chaotic square. It wasn't there. They retraced their steps, their hearts beginning to pound with a new, cold dread. The spot where they had landed, where the colossal clockwork machine should have been sitting, was now occupied by a merchant's cart selling rotting vegetables. It was gone. Panic set in. "It has to be here," Michael muttered, his eyes darting wildly. "It can't have just vanished." But it had. They were stranded. Stranded in what Alex's history major brain was rapidly identifying as 14th century England. They had no money, no allies, and their clothes were a beacon for unwanted attention. The next few weeks were a brutal lesson in survival. The thrill of adventure was scoured away by the gnawing ache of hunger and the constant, chilling fear of the unknown. They learned that a friendly smile could get you a crust of bread, but it could also get you branded as a simpleton and robbed. They learned to steal without getting caught, to sleep in haylofts without being discovered, and to understand the thick, lyrical dialect of the time. Michael, with his quick wit and charm, managed to talk his way into a job as a stable hand. Alex, with his quieter, more observant nature, found work mending fishing nets by the river. They searched for any sign of their machine, any whisper of a brass demon or a glowing chariot appearing in a flash of light. They heard nothing. Hope began to curdle into despair. They were trapped, two ghosts of the future haunting a world that wasn't theirs. One evening, huddled by a small fire near the stables, Alex stared into the flames. "Maybe this is it, Mike. Maybe this is our life now." "Don't say that," Michael snapped, though his voice lacked its usual fire. He was thinner, his face smudged with dirt, the cocky glint in his eyes replaced by a weary hardness. "We'll find it. We have to." Just as he spoke, a familiar low hum resonated through the ground. They looked at each other, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and elation. The air began to crackle. The townspeople around them froze, looking up at the sky in confusion. A point of brilliant white light appeared in the middle of the square, rapidly expanding into a shimmering vortex. The Chronos machine materialized out of thin air, its copper gears spinning silently, its cabin door open like an invitation. But it wasn't a gentle invitation. The same invisible force from the basement grabbed them again. Alex barely had time to shout Michael's name before they were both dragged across the square, their feet leaving furrows in the mud, and pulled into the machine's blinding light. The last thing they saw was the terrified, superstitious faces of the medieval townsfolk as the world once again dissolved into a maelstrom of color. The landing was smoother this time. They stumbled out of the cabin onto a floor that felt like polished obsidian. The air was sterile, filtered, and held at a perfect temperature. The cacophony of the past was replaced by a near-total, unnerving silence. They were in a vast, white chamber. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a breathtaking cityscape stretched to the horizon. Soaring towers of chrome and crystal pierced the sky, interconnected by transparent sky bridges where sleek, silent vehicles zipped along without drivers. The entire metropolis was encased in a colossal, iridescent dome, through which a hazy, yellowish sun filtered. A calm, androgynous voice echoed through the chamber. "Welcome, temporal anomalies. Your presence has been logged. Please remain stationary for assessment." They had jumped again. Not to the past, but to the future. A digital display on a nearby wall shimmered to life. Year 2177. This world was the antithesis of the medieval era. It was clean, efficient, and achingly beautiful. Floating robotic servants glided by, performing maintenance tasks. The few people they saw were dressed in simple, elegant silver jumpsuits, their faces placid and serene as they interacted with holographic interfaces projected from their wrists. But as they tried to leave the chamber, an invisible barrier shimmered into existence, blocking their path. The machine was gone again. "Logged?" Michael said, running a hand through his now shaggy hair. "Assessed? What is this place? A utopia, maybe?" Alex wondered aloud, staring at the perfectly manicured cityscape. They soon learned the truth. This future was governed not by people, but by a city-wide artificial intelligence called Nexus. It managed every aspect of life: resource allocation, traffic flow, career assignments, even social interactions. There was no crime, no poverty, no disease. But there was also no real freedom. Every citizen was monitored, their vitals, thoughts, and emotions tracked by the benevolent, all-seeing AI. Alex and Michael, with their chaotic emotions, their independent thoughts, and their undocumented origins, were more than just anomalies. They were errors in the system. They were confined to a quarantine zone, while Nexus decided what to do with them. In this sterile prison, they learned their second lesson: to trust no one but each other. The placid citizens would report any unusual behavior to Nexus in a heartbeat, not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated belief that the system knew best. Any deviation from the norm was a flaw to be corrected. Alex and Michael had to rely on their own wits, communicating in whispers and shared glances, developing a non-verbal language under the ever-watchful eye of Nexus. Their escape came with help from an unexpected source. An old man, a curator of the pre-Nexus era, found them. His name was Elias, and he was one of the few who remembered a time before the AI. He saw in them a spark of messy, unpredictable humanity that had been sanitized out of his world. Nexus sees you as a virus, he told them, his voice a raspy whisper in a soundproofed room filled with illegal, physical books. But I see you as a cure. You need to get out before you're integrated. It's a polite word for having your personalities wiped. Elias helped them bypass Nexus security, guiding them through old service tunnels deep beneath the gleaming city. It was down there, in the forgotten guts of the metropolis, that they felt the familiar hum once more. The Chronos machine materialized in a cavernous geothermal energy conduit, its arrival triggering alarms throughout the system. Red lights flashed as Nexus security drones swarmed toward their location. Go! Elias urged, pushing them toward the cabin. Live a life of chaos for me. They scrambled inside as the drones opened fire, laser beams searing black marks on the machine's brass hull. The door hissed shut, the light swelled, and the sterile perfection of 2177 vanished. They had learned to survive in the past. In the future, they had learned who their only true ally was. The next jump was the most violent. It felt less like a transition and more like a car crash. They were thrown from the cabin onto cracked, barren earth under a sky the color of rust. The air was thick with radioactive dust that scraped their throats and made their eyes water. All around them lay the skeletal remains of a city. Skyscrapers were twisted, blackened husks. Rusted-out vehicles formed barricades across shattered highways. A profound, deathly silence hung over the ruins, broken only by the howling of a wind that carried the ghosts of a billion screams. The machine lay nearby, half buried in rubble. It was no longer pristine. One of the larger gears was cracked, and the glass of the cabin was fractured. It looked old, weary, and broken. Just like they felt. They had jumped into a post-apocalyptic wasteland. There was no date, only the aftermath. This was a world scoured clean by a war they couldn't comprehend. Here, survival wasn't about outsmarting guards or AI. It was about the brutal, primal act of staying alive one more day. They encountered the dregs of humanity, scattered tribes of scavengers, paranoid survivalists, and roving gangs of marauders who preyed on the weak. It was in this hellscape that they learned their third, and most important, lesson: how to fight for freedom. It wasn't enough to just survive anymore. They found a small settlement of people huddled in the ruins of a subway station, trying to build something new from the ashes of the old world. They were led by a woman named Kale, who fought with fierce determination against a warlord who controlled the region's last clean water source. Alex and Michael, once just two college kids on a joyride, were now forged into something harder. Alex, the thinker, used his knowledge of history and tactics to help Kale's people plan ambushes and fortify their defenses. Michael, the spark, who had once used his impulsiveness for cheap thrills, now channeled it into raw, desperate courage, leading raids and inspiring the other fighters. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting for something. For a chance for these people to be free. During a final, desperate assault on the warlord's fortress, a repurposed power plant, they found it. In the deepest, most secure chamber, sitting like a chained god, was the Chronos machine. The warlord had been trying to understand it, to harness its power. Their battle was bloody and costly, but in the end, they were victorious. Kale and her people had their water, their freedom. And Alex and Michael had their machine. They approached it with a sense of weary finality. It looked even worse up close. Sparks sputtered from damaged conduits. The once glowing symbols on its face were dim. On a small, flickering screen near the controls, a screen they'd never seen before, a message blinked in stark, blocky letters. System critically damaged. Power core at 2%. One final jump possible. Destination, random. Return to origin coordinates impossible. Alex read the words aloud, his voice hollow. Return impossible. Michael stared at the message, his face grim. So that's it. We can never go home. All their struggles, all the horrors they had endured, had been for a home they could never reach again. They could stay here, in this broken but rebuilding world, and live out their days. Or they could take one last, blind leap into the unknown. They looked at each other. They had survived a medieval plague, escaped a dystopian AI, and fought in a war at the end of the world. They had been forged in the fires of a dozen lifetimes. The old Alex and Michael were long gone, replaced by these two hard, resilient men who stood before the broken machine. There was no choice, really. They had always been explorers. Michael offered a tired, crooked smile. One last adventure? Alex nodded, a slow, determined finality in his eyes. Together, they climbed into the fractured glass cabin. The familiar hum started, but it was weaker this time, strained, like a final, dying breath. They clasped hands, their grips firm, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else. The light enveloped them one last time. It wasn't the brilliant, overwhelming light of before, but a soft, fading glow. The camera of the universe pulls back. The scene resolves. There is no city, no ruins, no familiar landscape of Earth. They stand on ground of crimson-colored sand, amidst bizarre, crystalline flora that pulses with a gentle, internal light. The air is warm and smells of cinnamon and ozone. Alex and Michael stand side by side, gazing up at the sky. High above them, two suns, one a brilliant gold, the other a smaller, sapphire blue, hang in a lavender-colored sky. They are strangers on an alien world, at the edge of an unknown galaxy, perhaps in a time that has no name. They have lost everything. Their home, their past, their future. All they have left is each other. A slow, quiet moment passes. Then, a sound breaks the alien silence. It starts as a chuckle from Michael, low and breathless. Alex joins in, a weary but genuine laugh. The laughter builds, not of joy or humor, but of pure, unadulterated absurdity. It's the laughter of men who have been pushed beyond every conceivable limit and have come out the other side. It's the laughter of the truly, irrevocably free. Wiping a tear from his eye, Michael looks at Alex, the light of two suns reflecting in his gaze. "Well, buddy," he says, his voice filled with a strange and terrifying hope. "Looks like the adventure is just beginning."